the next piece.
All righty.
So some pretty good information this morning. Hopefully we've learned some lessons. Hopefully we don't have to repeat some of those lessons.
What's your name? Peter Alexander.
My name's Adam White. I'm with the Alaska Airmen's Association. I do government and legislative affairs, amongst other things. Just a really short, brief bio. I live in Nenana. I've come to Anchorage quite a bit. Matter of fact, today was my second trip to Anchorage this week and the third one in the past week and a half. So I come back and forth quite a bit. I do fly myself to Anchorage occasionally, so I'm a transient user of this airspace, and I'm the one you have to look out for because I don't know all the secrets. I've learned a lot of the secrets because I've been doing this this work for the Airmen's Association coming up on 20 years. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of meetings that I sit in talking about a lot of things, and it makes me really scared, the things that I hear, the problems we're trying to solve, the things that are going on. I hear people talk about, well, of course that's the way we do it. We've always done it. And the guy across the table, like, what are you talking about? I've been here 30 years longer than you have, and we've never done it that way. And everybody thinks they're right. And in the meantime, they're nose to nose over Eagle River at the same altitude when they shouldn't be. But anyway, so we're going to talk about a few things today. And I apologize, some of the formatting doesn't translate well. I think Steve Jobs and Bill Gates still hate each other, even though one of them is in the grave. But the difference between Mac and PC. So anyway, these are the main topics we're going to talk about. And if you have any questions as we go along, please raise your hand. I want to deal with those as we go. I'm going to try to keep us on task just a little bit because I want to make sure we cover all this stuff, but definitely want to leave some opportunity for interaction and questions, okay? So, aviation is nothing without acronyms. There's one here you may not know, but you will here in just a little bit. DIAC is being known. So Title 17. Who knows what Title 17 in the state statutes are about? Okay, that's part of the DOT regs that govern aviation. Chapters 42 and 45 deal specifically with aviation. Governor Dunleavy has issued an administrative order, which is the state level equivalent of an executive order. Kind of just an easy way to describe that. And there's a goal to reduce state regulations ultimately by 25% by 2028, by the start of 2028. So there's an interim goal of 15% by the end of next year. Now, how do we measure reducing state regulations? Is it word count? Is it character count? Is it paragraphs? Is it the number of regulations? There's all kinds of different ways you can measure that. The governor was not extremely specific about that, but I think we all understand his intent is to reduce administrative burdens. Make things easier for us to deal with state bureaucracy, okay? There's a lot of ambiguity, actually, in some of the state statutes and some of these regulations, because these are not statutes, these are regulations, so this is administratively worked through. And so there's actually some of these things that are contradictory to the FAA guidance and requirements, okay? So those are going to be pretty easy to filter out and clean up, right? You think that would be kind of top of the list. You may have heard, maybe you didn't, there were 4 meetings this week that DOT held to go through and ask for feedback about potential regulations that could be amended. I wrote a letter on behalf of the airmen back in October when this first was kind of being worked through, giving some suggestions. One of them was specifically about the disparity between all the airports and transient tight end. transient tie-down fees, whether there's even transient parking at airports or not, and sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. How do you know what's going on? Do you have to pay to park as a transient user? Is it after 36 hours, or is there no grace period, or is it, I mean, what is it? There's a lot of inconsistency there. And so that was one of the things I asked them to consider clarifying. Another one that I get a lot of feedback from a lot of our members about is lease rates. How many of you have a lease at a state airport? Okay. How many of you are wondering what's going to happen to your lease rate in the next couple of years? If your hand did not go up, it probably should. How many of you know that there's a schedule in the regulations about how your lease is supposed to increase over time? How many of you know that that schedule ends this year, and there's no guidance moving forward as to what state DOT would do about lease rates? So that was another one that I asked, hey, the schedule ends, what are we doing? Does that mean we're no longer going to have lease rate increases? We know that's not the answer. That'd be great if it was, right? The reason why that part was even in regulation is because years ago, DOT tried to go back and say, hey, you know, we haven't evaluated lease rates in a while. We're going to raise lease rates, and we're going to make up for the past 10 years of not raising lease rates. And we're going to make it all up in 1 year. And myself and Tom George with AOPA and several others said, whoa, time out. Just because you didn't do your homework and do things on a timeline doesn't mean that leaseholders should have to come up with sometimes triple what their current lease rate was at that time. And so we got them into a phased approach to do that, kind of get it on a scale. So anyway, be looking for information from folks like myself, Tom George, and other folks with other organizations. When DOT actually has some proposals out there to look at, right now they don't. They're kind of in the fact-finding stage of this whole effort, so we're pretty early in this. There will be some opportunities for you to be able to comment on some proposals. Now, I will say that if you've got some ideas, now is the time to let DOT know. And if you want to do that, I can get you the email address to do that with. I'd like to know what it is you're suggesting, because I want to be able to help run that to ground myself and help champion that. Because DOT is trying to figure out how are they going to reduce that 25% regulations. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a quick question. I saw you when you brought this out, and I did pull up 42 and 45 and try to muddle through what that actually even
It's a
meant.
great cure for insomnia, isn't
Yeah,
it?
really. But
Better than the FAA.
my question was, I'm familiar with, obviously with the primary things they had, Lake Hood, Anchorage, Fairbanks.
Right.
But then they also mentioned other parts in the state that would be impacted, including some of the backcountry things. Do you have any more insight to that and what that specifically, because trying to formulate a suggestion or a comment, I was just like, which way do you go with this?
Sure.
And so, yeah.
So, I'm going to tailor the answer
Okay.
to things I know you're passionate about and
Okay.
what you were involved with.
Okay.
I'm not going to write your letter for you, but I'm going to give you a really good outline.
Okay.
So backcountry access is a big deal for a lot of us, right? Going off airport, operating in different parts of the state, trying to figure out land ownership and what are the rules, can I even go there? Because, the rules for the state park versus national park versus just, So there have been some things in the past that we have had difficulty with as an industry to help DOT because of regulation, like clearing brush at the Bold Airstrip, where they wanted the folks involved, the volunteers, to basically fill out a lease application to go out there and clear brush so that we don't tear the fabric on our wings, and have all kinds of insurance requirements and all kinds of things like you would as a normal leaseholder. And we're trying to help you. Why are you making us do all this? Well, because regulation says that they had to. So that's a potential area to look at, and offering some of that, because you're right. There's the international airport system, which I'm going to tell myself. I'm pretty sure that's chapter 42, and then 45 is the rule side of the So I think we all know this here, but state DOT is the largest sponsor of airports in the country. The next closest, which we have over 200 airports, just ballpark numbers. Oregon is the next closest with 30 something, I think. Okay, most airports are run by municipalities or counties or, you know, or boroughs. So there's less than 10. I think 8 was the last count I saw, maybe, non-DOT sponsored airports in the state. So these regulations are important. Okay, we need to make sure that we can look through this and offer some suggestions, because they will come up with some suggestions on their own, but now's the time where they're asking for our input. So, did that?
It does. And January 9th is the.
January 9th is the deadline for that. They would like it by the 9th. They have said that they will take input anytime it comes in. They may or may not be able to act on it to the same degree, but they'll take that issue. Okay. So, AASF. So, before now, has anybody heard that term?
No.
Okay, a couple of people, a lot of those in the room. So the Don Young Alaska Safety Initiative, just a brief history and background. This came about because the NTSB was looking at some trends and some numbers here in Alaska and said, oh man, this is not good. I think we all knew that. We all knew that the things that we deal with here are a little bit different than the rest of the country. NTSB said, hey, FAA, you gotta fix this. Now the NTSB is not the FAA's boss. NTSB can't mandate anything for the FAA to do, but they offered some very strongly worded suggestions, and they did it in a very public forum at the UAA campus just across the way over here. And that brought a lot of things to light. It brought it out of the darkness and put a big spotlight on it. So with that though, the good thing that came about was there was some funding that was made available. And it started out with the FAA Alaska Safety Initiative, FASI, and then FAA reauthorization happened, some other things happened in DC, name changed a little bit, funding structure changed a little bit, and here's what the goals are. So, you've probably heard with the One Big Beautiful Bill, the phrase that this is a once in a generation opportunity for funding for infrastructure projects. Alaska is going to benefit from that pretty significantly, actually. And again, these are just round numbers. I can give you more detailed and specific numbers, but we're going to get close to 100 new weather stations here in the state. And when I say new weather stations, I'm not talking about just refurbished. Okay, we're talking about new locations. Now, there's a difference between some of these weather stations. There's an AWAS, and then there's what we're calling VWAS. How many people have heard the term VWAS before? Okay, Marshall, you don't count. Okay, not many people have heard that term VWAS. So, how many people know what AWAS stands for? Somebody tell me what it is. A lot of hands. So let's find out if you really know.
Automatic weather observing system.
There you go. Close enough. So that's legit, for real, ICAO approved METAR data, right? Again, throwing out all these acronyms. Okay, so that's what an AWAS is. There's ASOS, which what does that stand for? Automatic Surface Observation System. And who owns those? You didn't know there's going to be quizzes today. Okay, so that's owned by the National Weather Service. AWASs are owned by the FAA, or not owned, not all owned, but anyway, for big round numbers. So those are the approved sources to issue a METAR. Why are METARs important? Well, not always where you land out, but let's look at the broader scope of some regulations. There's some 135 guys in here.
Estimate line.
There you go. What do you have to have as a 135 operator or as a 121 operator before you can actually go somewhere? You gotta have weather. What is approved weather? AWAS, ASOS, okay? So, talking about a lot of stuff here today. So VWAS is, if AWAS is the gold standard, AWAS and ASOS are gold standard is what is a METAR. Those things are very expensive. They're very expensive to buy, they're very expensive to install, and they're very expensive to maintain. We know that they're hard to maintain because some of these weather stations are offline, and they've been offline for a long time. If you fly in other parts of the state, a couple of them have been offline for almost 18 months. And that's a whole nother conversation that this program is gonna help fix. So anyway, throughout this whole thing, the weather camera program started looking at, well, can we come up with like a silver standard for weather? That we can start putting at weather camera sites, we can start putting in mountain passes, we can start putting in some other airports that don't, maybe they don't have an instrument approach, so we don't really need the full-blown, fully certified $1 million+ each location. You know, can we come up with something better? The answer is yes. And so some of these stations, visual weather observation system, there's the V. Actually, the V in that acronym has changed numerous times. I can't remember exactly where we are today because there were so many. Anyway, so we're gonna get a lot more weather stations in the state. Nobody seems to be excited about that.
I am.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
How will those VWAS report? They don't generate a METAR, how do they report?
So that's a good question. They will still be brought into the system. You'll still be able to see them, like on Sky Vector or FlightAware, ForeFlight, all those things, Garmin Pilot. You'll be able to pull those up there. When you talk to flight service, they'll be able to tell you that information. And some 135 operators might be able to get that data worked into their op specs so they can go to an airport with that data. That's going to depend on their principal operations spec and all kinds of other stuff. So now the advantage of these VWAS stations is they're newer technology. They're able to self-correct, self-check. There's usually multiple sensors, multiple numbers of the same sensor. So if you've got a temperature gauge that starts acting weird and it's compared to the other one, like, yeah, you know what, I don't trust this one anymore. We're not going to use that one. We're going to use this one. It can self-calibrate. You can log into it remotely and do some diagnostics. All these things that today we take for granted because of what technology's allowed us to do is not easy to do with the old AWAS systems, okay? And these things are coming in a fraction of the cost.
How are they gonna determine where all the new locations are gonna be?
Oh, see, here we go. That's where the rub comes. Where do we put these things? And what's the matrix do we use to determine where we're gonna put them? Because we could just throw a dart at a dartboard and start, because, I mean, you ask me where I want weather, and I got 100 different places to put it. I got some ideas. You've got some ideas, and we may be the same on like 50 to 60 of those places, but maybe not on the others, right?
Right.
So how do we do that? I'll tell you that there's a really smart guy at UAA who's an economist. His name is Dr. Mike Jones. He has given us some data, and we've got some real numbers about the real impact of our state not being able to get to our villages. And what does that mean for the real world? What does it mean for food going into a village and the spoilage rates? What does that mean for medicine getting into a village? What does that mean for medevac? What does that mean for just basic transportation? And so we've been looking at those numbers. There's a weather working group, which myself and a couple other folks in the room are a part of that. And we have come up with a list. There were multiple spreadsheets, and it's kind of sorted down into one. Sent that information off to folks within the FAA that are outside of Alaska, and they're making that final determination. We've got a pretty good idea of where they're going to be. There's a dashboard that DOT has that I can send to you that shows those locations. The goal is to get weather into villages and locations where there's not weather, where it would bring the biggest impact. Some of these VWAS stations, we're going to start putting them at off-airport locations is the goal, so we can have good weather in some of the mountain passes, and be able to get, just because you can maybe shoot an approach at a village or know what the weather is, if I can't get to the village because I got no idea what the conditions are like going through the pass, doesn't help me, right? So there's a lot of folks working through that. Some of the other things that we're gonna get is gonna get some more weather cameras. And the goal with those weather cameras, that there's gonna be weather sensors at those weather cameras. The other goal is that there's gonna be weather cameras at those weather sensors, so it's this thing, right? So with the technology that we've got today, and the bandwidth that we're able to enjoy, with Starlink and some other options that the FAA is starting to use, we've got the ability to have not just data, but pictures in most of our locations. And so you'll start to see some of that happening here within the next 18 months, 2 years. Hopefully sooner than that at a couple locations. Okay. All right, so the other thing that's going to be coming out of this is some more RCOs and RCAGs. Just to kind of get the room, how many of you are instrument rated? How many of you are instrument proficient? A lot fewer hands. Okay. Well, at least you're honest, right? Right? Okay. So RCAG, anybody know what that acronym is? Who are you talking to when you talk on an RCAG?
Center.
Anchor center, talking to center, okay? RCOs, you're talking to flight service, right? So, we've got some big communication gaps in this state. Big gaps. And so we're gonna try to close up some of those gaps, okay? Improving some airport conditions, 20 to 1. Anybody know the significance of that slope, the 20 to 1 slope at an airport? Obstacle penetration, yeah. You'll look on a lot of the instrument approach plates for the state. The instrument approach is not available at night because of 20 to 1 penetrations. Because there's a tree that's somewhere in the vicinity of the airport that's penetrating that 20 to 1 slope. There's other obstacles that are inside that zone. So that's just one example of some funding that's going to be able to be used, which is a unique thing, and we don't need to get into the weeds too much with that. But using federal funding to clear some of those obstacles has not been an easy thing to do until now. And so what does that mean for us as VFR pilots? And I say us because that's kind of the majority of what most of us in the room are doing, right? You may need that someday. Things that come along with that is some additional approaches maybe, and some other systems that are the infrastructure that goes along with an instrument approach. Do we as Part 91 VFR folks need to have approach lighting systems at airports?
Yeah.
There's no requirement for that for us, right? But there's a requirement for that for IFR operations, and some of the commercial operators have to have those things working or they can't go in there. But as a day VFR Part 91 pilot flying around the state, you would really appreciate it if you click that mic and all of a sudden the world lights up in front of you and now you can see that airport, right? So that's how a lot of these things affect us indirectly. Again, I say us as Part 91 kind of operations, okay? So be looking for some more information coming out about where we can start to see some of these new weather stations coming online and all these other things as we come and go. Okay. I'm going to hide behind the podium. So, how many have not heard about this change in airspace that's coming in Anchorage? Okay. Wow, that's actually very good. That's less than a handful. Okay, I'm not going to embarrass those who say they didn't know, but I really would like to talk to you later and find out what rock you're hiding under, because I get scared and I'm looking for a new place to hide. But there's changes coming to Anchorage. Okay, big changes to the Glass Charlie. There was some discussion early on, and it still pops its head up every now and then, that the changes that need to be made can't be accommodated by a Class Charlie. So maybe we need to consider going Class B. I see a lot of head shaking. Okay, so, yeah, that conversation is not on the table anymore. I'm not gonna say it's dead, but it's no longer on the table. Okay? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We'll talk about how the process has worked. Part 93 versus Class Charlie. Some changes are coming with Part 93 airspace here in the Anchorage Bowl because of the redesign. There's going to be some changes to the Class Deltas, like here at Merrill, and over at Lake Hood, and over at Bryant, to accommodate some of the changes in the Class Charlie. Okay? You can expect some changes to the VFR routes in and out of the Anchorage Bowl. We've had a lot of opportunity to be engaged up till now. We're in kind of a period of a lull, I'll call it, maybe the eye of the storm, when things kind of calm down for a bit, because the FAA is going back and taking into account a lot of feedback that they've received. So we're going to get into some more details about this stuff. So if it were to have gone to Class B, what are some of the major hurdles that we would have faced if it was Class B? Here's the answer, right? So there's a Mode C veil, an ADS-B veil around Class Bravo airspace. And it's 30 nautical miles from the center of the airspace, which is usually centered on the primary airport. So Palmer would be outside of it, but Scylla, Big Lake, Houston, all that, coming all the way back down to Big Sioux, all the way down to Kenai. Just to get inside that airspace, just to cut the corner, you would be required to be ADS-B out. Now that is not going to happen because we're going to Class Charlie, but that was one of the big obstacles and hurdles and arguments against going to Class B. But for folks outside of the state at FAA headquarters and for some politicians on Capitol Hill, that argument was all the more reason why we should go to Class B. But we're not. And so I just want to put that to rest right now. There was a lot of us that were very heavily involved and engaged early on in that process to make sure that we did not go to Class B. Now, right now, today, there's 2 requirements that have to be met in order for an area to go to Class B. Does anybody know what those 2 are? The number of enplanements at the primary airport and the number of operations. It's an and. Anchorage meets the number of operations. Very easily meets the numbers of operations. I mean, like, doesn't even try and we meet that. What we don't meet is the number of enplanements. If I know what number of enplanements mean, it's the number of people who actually get on an airplane and go somewhere from Anchorage International. We get a lot of people coming through that airport. I came in on the 6 o'clock flight this morning, and I was shocked how many people were in that terminal today. I know we're getting closer to Christmas, but it was full. Most of the gates had airplanes sitting in them. But we don't meet the number of people on those airplanes. There's an argument to be made, and there's discussions happening that it doesn't make any difference what's on the airplane. If it's your Amazon package on a 747, or if it's a person on a 737, it's still an airplane and it's still traffic that we've got to worry about, right? Now, not to make light at all of the UPS accident, but how much bigger of a tragedy would that have been if that had been an airplane full of people, right? So that's the things that they're trying to weigh when they look at these determinations. There's a big conversation happening right now that remove the and insert or. Number of operations or the number of enplanements would trigger going to Class B. So we're not there yet, but I say all that because it's important to know that in 10 years, we may be having this conversation again.
What's the number of payments required?
knew somebody was gonna ask me that. I can't remember off the top of my head, and if I gave you a number, it would be a guess right now. We're not that far off, to be honest with you. The state's forecast, for the next 5 years doesn't get to that threshold yet, though. There were a couple of good things that came out of COVID. Getting that number of employments well below that threshold was one of them, because nobody went anywhere. Okay? So that knocked off the trend a little bit. We've gotten back to pre-COVID numbers, though, with travel. So, but that number's, I can help you find it later if you want to know. Okay, so on this side, this was the initial proposal that the FAA came out with for changing the acreage class Charlie. This over here is what is currently on the books as being proposed. You'll notice some areas that area G shrunk a little bit, and that was area H, so that's gotten a little smaller. We look up here, the J, K, and all these areas up here are different than on this side. So, I was the co-chair of an ad hoc committee to review the FAA's initial proposal. There were a lot of folks that were participating in that. Again, several people in this room were in and out of those meetings. We gave a lot of feedback to the FAA, significant amount of feedback to the FAA. Matter of fact, I've been told by numerous people within the FAA that the document we produced and the way that ad hoc committee process worked is now being used as the prime example of how to do an ad hoc committee. Okay, I'm not saying that because of my own efforts. I was the unlucky person who was voted as one of the co-chairs. It was an honor to do that, but the group together as a whole produced a very good report to the FAA. And the FAA took that information and then came out with this proposal. So this is what has gone out to informal airspace meetings back a month ago. You may have heard about those. I will tell you that the next opportunity for us to comment on this proposal is several months away, because the FAA is working through a lot of the recommendations that have already been submitted in that earlier process. I can tell you that this area down here around Lake Otis and around Flying Crown and some other communities here are going to be modified a little bit. This area down here is probably going to change just a little bit. I've got some intel that they're reviewing some things down there. This area up here, the Valley and Goose Bay segments, if you notice over here, segment K was Class Charlie. Now what's the requirement, and this is going to come up later, what is the requirement to operate inside Class Charlie?
Communication with the controlling agency.
Okay, communication.
Mode C.
Mode C. And I'm hearing people rumble about ADSB. Yes. Okay. What about to be above Class Charlie?
Still gotta have
ADSB.
Don't necessarily have to talk, but you have to be transponder Mode C and ADSB. Okay. Now, that's up to 10,000 feet. So, anyway, that's a weird thing about Alaska with the ADSB requirements, but it gets into these. So, originally, this was going to be Class Charlie airspace, and this was to, so here's the reason why all this is, well, not the reason, the prime reason why this was being considered to change. It's because the runway extension over here at Elmendorf. The goal is to be able to get that north-south runway long enough that they can use that and have an instrument approach. And in order to do that, they have to protect some airspace. There's a lot of benefits for the military being able to operate in the same flow as international. How many of us have asked for a Part 93 deviation going across the water and denied that request? I think all of us have, right? It's because they only have one option, they're coming in 6, right? So this will help alleviate a bunch of that. But in order to do that, they've got to protect some airspace. And so, part of that process was to say, hey, what do we do about Goose Bay? There's a lot of folks that go out there to Goose Bay to practice. You're gonna have them be inside Class Charlie to be able to get there. How's this gonna work? What's gonna happen? Valley segment, and again, these altitudes are still being evaluated. We're pretty sure what they're gonna be, but this is gonna be higher up. And this is to get the fighters, because their ILS is on a much steeper glide slope, because they don't like to get down low unless they're juking the job, and they can't do that for very long. So they like to have a high ILS as to capture some of that traffic so they can be in controlled airspace sooner to be able to accommodate that. So these areas are going to be Part 93 airspace. Now, when I say Part 93, what does that mean? Special rules, okay? Now, when we say Part 93, a lot of us think, well, Part 93 is the route that I come in and out of here with, right? That's part of Part 93, but that is not Part 93. There's other parts of the country, I keep using the word part, there's other locations in the country that have Part 93 airspace. Ketchikan is Part 93 airspace. Pensacola, Florida is Part 93 airspace. Lots of other places have Part 93 airspace. It just means that what's being done there doesn't fit the cookie cutter mold of the current airspace structure, and so we got to come up with some special rules. So to accommodate a lot of the comments that were made, this area up here, you just are going to have to talk to TRACON. You're going to have to talk to approach. You don't have to be ADSB equipped to be in that area, is the current proposal, okay? So again, a lot of stuff here. I could talk for days about all this stuff, but we're going to keep moving just a little bit. This is primarily to tell you that this is what the FAA initially proposed. This is what they are currently proposing, but I can tell you that this is not going to be what you see next come from the FAA. There's going to be some slight changes. So when I send out a notice to the Airmen's members, AOPA is going to send out notices. Probably the Safety Foundation will let you know that there's another opportunity to review these things. If you need help understanding what's being presented, then there's people that can help you with that. So this is just a little bit bigger image to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on. We're still going to have a semblance of the Seward segment down here, and then this requires 91-215, which is just communicated language approach. But this has got some altitudes on it, so this kind of helps you understand what we're dealing with. The biggest question I get, can I still come and go from Merrill and Lake Hood and not be ADSB equipped with this proposal? And the answer is yes, you can. I'm not seeing dancing in the streets or everybody's excited about it. I don't see anybody angry about that either. I see suspicious maybe, yeah. You hear me now, believe me later. Okay, so there are some accommodations to be able to come and go. Now I will tell you that area L and area B, Lima and Bravo, are going to be joined because they're essentially the same altitude structure. So as long as you stay below 1,400 feet, you'll be okay. Yes, sir.
Do you have any sense on how that's going to affect special VFR going in and out, Lake Hood and Merrill?
Yes. That's been a question that I've asked and other people have asked. So here's actually, I think what we're going to get is better than what we have today in regards to special VFR and in regards to getting across the water and not being forced to stay down so low. We've got some altitude that we can play with now. We're still going to have the same scenario of special VFR and the way that handles and comes and goes, but special VFR will be preserved. You bet.
So they're going to rewrite 93, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The initial goal of the FAA was to completely get rid of the Part 93 language that pertained to anchors, but now they've realized they can't because there's too many things that we have to do a little bit through. Yes, sir.
Well, I commented at the informal meetings, and my biggest concern is that area J, for safety. with a floor for non-participating airplanes at 1,000 feet.
Yep.
And you got ground level at 200, and that's a focal area anyway.
Right at the power line bend.
And then you got somebody coming through the 1,400 at 12, they're gonna bust it, because they, you know, how do a non-participating airplane know that?
Yep.
Yeah, I just don't like it. I
So
think it's a
we're
big
gonna
safety
talk a little
problem.
bit more about that in a couple slides, but you're right. That's a valid concern. Absolutely. Anybody really mad yet?
Go ahead.
Yes,
The
What do we
military's
got?
still
We
gonna
can
come
fill
in
out.
over the inlet to runway 6 at Elmendorf?
that will still occur, but not near the frequency that it does today, is what we're told.
How will they handle it?
They will most likely handle it very similar to what they do now with a red light, green light scenario in the tower. Elmendorf will let Merrill Tower know, hey, I got, you know, F-22s coming in. And so they'll coordinate. You might, and this is just this is the scenarios that we've all been talking about in these groups. If you're departing from Merrill and you want to climb and go, because we're going to get rid of the Part 93 tunnel. That's going to go away for sure. And if you wanted to cross below a certain altitude, Merrill Tower will probably just clear you and you can go. If you wanted to cross at a little bit higher altitude, then they may say, oh, I'm going to need you to hold for 2 minutes. We got inbound coming into Elmendorf, and then you wait a couple minutes so they get past, off you go. Instead of being told, no, you're going to have to stay low. So, yeah, and whether it's really 2 minutes or not, you know, it's just. Okay? Yes, sir.
Will this affect the VFR departures, like the City High and
Yes.
the BLM?
Yep. You see, it's kind of, I didn't put it on there very dark, the draft across that. This is not final. This is just some of the things that we've talked about. Because there's a VFR route task force that I sit on with some of the controllers at Merrill and Approach and all those folks working through some of this. Is figuring out how do we get people in and out. What's the best way that's going to happen? Do these procedures that we have today work with the new airspace? You know, just working through all that stuff. The instrument approach procedures are pretty much updated and been revised. There's a couple of them that are being tweaked because Alaska Airlines had some issues when they flew it in the flight simulators. So the instrument stuff is being worked separately from the VFR. What you'll probably see, and these points are not, you know, sleeper strips obviously there, but some of these are ones that are just being talked about. This is all whiteboard, spitball kind of stuff that we're doing in some of these meetings, okay? So don't think you're gonna fly this, because this is gonna change, but this is some of the things we've come up with. And we'll talk more, and again, I don't keep wanting to jump ahead. To your point about airplanes converging, low altitudes, major speed differences between airframes, that's a problem. And that's been a problem for a long time. We're gonna have to change the way we fly here in the Anchorage Bowl. And I know there's some of you probably in this room that are just raging on the inside because you don't want to change what you're doing. And I get it. But is it okay to have a King Air coming across the inlet at 600 foot at 200 knots and a Super Cub pedaling as hard as they can and can't get out of the way of the King Air? Should the King Air maybe fly a little bit higher? Should the PC-12s and Caravans be kind of segregated because of their speed, a little bit different than some of the folks who just simply can't go on a good day at a screaming power on dive more than 90 knots? So these are the things we're trying to address. We're also trying to address how do people come and go. We've got all the radar tracks. We've got all the data, primary targets included, meaning if you're not even transponder equipped, the radar still paints you. We know where the tracks are, we know where people are going, and how do we make this work? It is not easy. And that's not to say that the product at the end is gonna be perfect, because it won't be. There's gonna be some modifications. Now, what we will probably see is we will see some changes to these VFR procedures before the airspace goes hot. Because we're gonna do some phased changes to tweak some of the VFR procedures we've got today to clear up some of the problems that we're currently having and to make it fit better with the proposed airspace. When you read these and it gives you an altitude, you better be on that altitude. And when it tells you that you need to fly over this intersection or you need to fly down this road, you better be where it tells you to be. Because you look at the other routes and the other procedures, they're telling people to do something different on another place, and if you're 100 foot off and they're 100 foot off in the opposite direction, we got problems. Okay? The only way this airspace is gonna work is if you fly with more precision. And your situational awareness has got to improve. And I'm saying that for every single person that operates in this airspace. The person that only flies twice a summer, or the person that flies in and out of Lake Hood 7 times a day, every day of the week, all summer long, we gotta get better. And we gotta get better because we found some problems. We found some big problems. We found some problems that we got, everybody's got egg on their face on some of the problems we found. We're gonna talk about that in a second. If you want some more information about the airspace, you can scan that QR code, that'll take you to the FAA's website. It talks about the airspace. The graphics I've showed you, you can download those graphics and look at them. There's a KMZ file that you can put into Google Earth. So it's a 3D image of the proposed airspace, and you can spin it and turn it, figure out everything. Just know that is the current proposal. It is not finished. There's going to be some changes, but that's currently what's out there for the FAA to show the public. Okay? Give folks an opportunity to take a picture of that if you want to scan that QR code. So, next thing, which I'm running out of time, so we're going to bump ahead here. To be inside Class Charlie, one of the requirements is you have to be ADS-B. Now, when I say ADS-B, what do I mean? ADS-B out. What's the difference between ADS-B out and ADS-B in? Well, there's a big difference, okay? And if you need to remind yourself what those things are, somebody in the room can help you figure that out at the break. So, the big problem we have is that a lot of people are not following the rules. I don't know if it's because they don't know the rules, or if they know the rules and they do it anyway. But we gotta fix it. Because if we don't start fixing it ourselves, if you don't take care of this, you're not gonna like the way mom and dad fix it for you. Okay? So, that ADS-B privacy is the biggest pushback I hear from folks who do not want to equip with ADS-B. How many people here are ADS-B equipped? Awesome. How many people are not? Okay, how many people will never do it, ever, never, you can't make me? You know. I'll tell you, from part of the state I live in, there's a lot of people like, you can put a gun to my dog's head and I still won't do it. But, you know, that's a whole nother conversation. The things that are happening in Anchorage have gotten the attention of headquarters for the FAA. It's got the attention of folks on Capitol Hill. We've had a series of unfortunate events. We had the mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. between the military helicopter and the airliner that Again, it's a tragedy.
Well, they had the equipment, they just weren't using it.
That's
You
exactly
gotta
where I
use
was
your
going.
Equipment.
That's exactly where I was going.
Okay, sorry.
So politicians are using that as an example of this is why acreage needs to be Class B, and I'm like, wait a minute, what was the airspace? What was the equipment requirements? All the things that you're talking about are fixes, were already in place there, and we had 67 people die. So that's not gonna fix it. But it's a great soundbite, it looks good on TV, and it's sensational. So there's been a proposal for the Rotor Act. If you're not sure what that is, basically the Rotor Act says that if you are in rule mandated airspace, meaning if you are required to be ADS-B out, if this act were to go through, you would also be required to be ADS-B in. Now, on the surface, to me, that sounds pretty logical. You're gonna get the benefit of ADS-B because it's gonna be displayed. Now, there's reasons why people have decided not to do that. But the other part is that part of the Rotor Act is when you read through that, it leaves the door wide open to expand rule mandated airspace beyond what it is today. To the point where it would be a blanket ADS-B mandate. It didn't matter what airspace you're in, you're gonna have to equip. So I'm working that issue. Our congressional delegation is very attentive to that issue and what that would mean for us here in Alaska. Part 108, beyond visual line of sight, how many people know what that stands for? That's the drones that are going to be operating beyond the range of visual sight of the operator. It's out there flying around. Sense and avoid, we all have a mandate that we have to see and avoid other aircraft, right? Can you see a 55-pound drone carrying a package?
No.
Can't see an airplane.
Amazon claims they can see things, but they hit the same crane twice in one day with two separate drones. So they can't see anything either. So in that proposal, it said, if you fly below 500-foot AGL and choose not to be ADS-B equipped, you no longer have the right of way. The drone would have the right of way. That was my reaction too, by the way. Not good. So what does that mean? That's a blanket ADS-B mandate, right? If you're going to operate below 500 feet, who would not want to have the right of way over a drone, right? Okay, so these are lots of other things that we're working through. How many people have heard the phrase electronic conspicuity? A couple of hands. All right. So electronic conspicuity is basically a pared down version of ADS-B. It would be completely anonymous. It would be completely portable, that you could you could move it between aircraft. It would basically be what you use today as a portable ADS-B in receiver. It would give that box the capability of broadcasting your position. It's not going to broadcast an end number. It's not going to broadcast an aircraft type. It's only going to broadcast, this is an aircraft and this is where I am. For those of us who have ADS-B in, what is one of the biggest benefits that we get from being ADS-B in?
Seeing other airplanes,
Seeing the other aircraft. But what aircraft are you seeing?
only those that are equipped.
Only those that are equipped with out.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes they'll rebroadcast the position of other targets that have a discrete spot code, but that's not always the case in all airspaces. So electronic conspicuity was mentioned in Part 108 in that notice of proposed rulemaking as a way to possibly mitigate having to equip with ADS-B. But the problem is, all the way up until now, a lot of us have been asking the FAA for that option. Because in Europe, they use a box that's very similar to this. And the FAA and the FCC has says, no, no, 1,000 times no, we're never going to do that. If you're going to be ADS-B, you're going to be ADS-B, and it's only going to be a TSO solution. Now they're coming back and saying, well, you know what, that's not really that bad of an idea. Maybe we'll look at making that a possible mitigation. The problem is, nobody makes a box that's legal to sell in the U.S. Except for UAVonics has a box that they could make sellable in the U.S. very quickly. But again, it was a way to soften what they were doing in Part 108. So all this stuff to come back around to, yes, there are problems with ADS-B, and privacy is the biggest one. People say that it's money. Yes, it's an issue. Trust me, I'm in the process right now of outfitting one of the airplanes I fly, and before I'm done, it's gonna be $8,000. Okay, now, I'm going with the best Garmin in and out transponder, and there's some other things that needed to be done in order to make that work in the airframe. But if people tell you that you can be ADS-B out for $2,000, yeah, you can. It's $2,500 now, by the way, because they just raised the prices. But money is an issue. But some of you that are saying, no, it's money, just spent $3,000 per tire on your bush wheels. So don't talk to me about the money part. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a, there, in this, it doesn't happen here, but in the States, you fly into a strip and they've got your ADS-B and then they bill you for landing.
Yep.
And you didn't even know, you know, all of a sudden you get this bill. So let's eliminate that.
And so there's another bill going through that would eliminate the possibility of that. And so I've gone on record with the Airmen's Association supporting that bill. So yeah, that is a problem. To my knowledge, that is not happening anywhere in Alaska yet. Okay, this is where I wanted to get, I'm running on time here, so bear with me. So this is a safety seminar. So we need to talk about some safety stuff. How many people have heard of the Swiss cheese model? Okay, that's good. You don't like Swiss cheese?
You get tired of hearing it all the time.
You're tired of hearing it? Okay, good. So how many folks have heard of the broken window philosophy? How many people have heard how bad that went for New York City police?
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so what happened in New York back in the 90s? They decided, you know what, we think we can reduce crime by going after small, petty things that lead to larger crimes, like graffiti and broken windows and jaywalking and all of that, okay? That kind of went bad for New York City because the way it was misapplied, but I think the theory is somewhat sound, that if you have a disregard for little things, it manifests itself in a disregard for the bigger things, okay? So if you have a disregard for 1 mile clear of clouds, because you know your version of 1 mile may be 3/4 of a mile for another guy, but you know, right? So you start drifting on what you're comfortable with, which leads to another thing that we've all heard, a normalization of deviance. How many people have heard that term before? Okay, somebody want to tell me what that means?
You break the rule, but it becomes normal, and you don't think about it anymore.
I don't feel bad for breaking that rule anymore because I've done it 1,000 times and nothing ever happened, right? So that phrase was coined when the Challenger disaster happened. And that final report was the first instant where that phrase was used to apply to aeronautical safety, where there was a normalization of deviance when it came to dealing with O-rings at NASA. And we all know how that went, right? Really cheap, small part.
Twice.
Yeah. It led to really bad stuff. So I don't think I'm making too big of a stretch when I say that if you are knowingly breaking the rules about ADS-B and operating in airspace you're not supposed to, that you may be doing the same thing with other rules and regulations. And if you're not careful, you may be the topic of conversation one day at one of these panels. Now, I've been accused of being pretty dramatic. I've got 3 daughters and they say I'm more dramatic than they are. I don't believe them. But I don't think this is too far of a stretch, okay? We have a major problem in Anchorage. Major problem in Anchorage of people operating inside the Charlie that are not ADS-B equipped. In air traffic control, they're not wrong in saying, we're not the cops. And they're not. You ask them for a clearance, They're gonna give it to you if they can. Flight Standards says, what's going on? We find out after the fact that we got people breaking the rules. We got our obligation to make sure that stops. Now, we have the compliance philosophy, which has been a great thing from the airman's perspective for people who either they were unaware, there were some other issues, it wasn't a blatant willful violation. The FAA will work with them and kind of get them trained back and brought back into the fold. And then there's the pilots who say, well, I mean, I've done it 1,000 times and they've never said no. And I asked for clearance to go through there and they gave it to me. So, I asked earlier how many of you were IFR proficient that were instrument rated. I'm finding that unless you're IFR rated, there's a trend for a regular private pilot who's non-instrument rated, who doesn't want to stand up against what ATC gives them as a clearance. Who is ultimately responsible for determining whether or not you can execute a clearance? Pilot in command. I asked that question to a purely VFR crowd. They're not near as many people who say that. So, when you ask for a clearance and you're given a squawk code and you think you're going to get into Class Charlie and you're not ADS-B equipped, you are the one breaking the rule. Stop it. Okay? Stop it. Because it's going to change. It's going to have to change, and people are going to have to get with the program. Now, if you don't want to equip with ADS-B, that's fine. There's ways that you can still come and go and not be in rule-mandated airspace. If you equip, will you have more options to get in and out? Absolutely. If you don't want to slog it out with everybody else over the power line turn, and you want to get up a little bit higher, equip with ADS-B and get yourself up in the airspace where you can cut that corner and you can have somebody helping you find traffic. Okay? And again, back to the privacy thing. That QR code takes you to the FAA website where you can request that your personal identifying information is removed from the public side of the aircraft registry database, because that's a problem, folks, and I get it, I totally understand. Nobody wants to have somebody sit there in their armchair and pull up your IN number, which, by the way, I hope that person doesn't mind that I use that as an example, to know where you are and what you're doing. And that's actually a leasing company that technically owns that airplane, so I pulled up one that wasn't somebody personal. So, anyway. Okay, this is, sorry guys, I'm really running along. Let me wrap this up. How many people know what this is? Surely somebody here has seen one of these before. I was hoping somebody here would have actually used one.
Oh, is that the ship stars? Oh.
Yes,
Okay.
that is an aircraft sextant. It's actually pretty cool. That's one that I own. And that just tells you how paranoid I am. So, this is a bigger issue that I'm starting to see because of the things I'm involved with and all the meetings I'm involved with and all the things that I see going on within the FAA, because I have the luxury of standing back. I can see the whole forest, okay? I am not so close that all I can see is the tree that's standing in front of me and the job that I've been given with the FAA, okay? As an FAA employee of mine. There's a phrase that's used to describe the FAA is that they are silos of excellence. They are. The area that they are responsible for, they are world class, and that is no exaggeration. There is nobody else better in the world at doing what we do than we are, okay, when it comes to FAA stuff. But it's a silo. They don't know what the other silo next to them is doing, and what they're doing impacts the silo next to them. So how does all these things work together? And so this is where I get paranoid, and I will admit that one of my favorite movies is the Mel Gibson movie, Conspiracy Theory, and that I am looking for new conspiracy theories because my old ones have all come true. And even Noah was a conspiracy theorist until it started raining. But here's where we are. We have allowed ourselves to put all of our eggs in the basket of GPS. And one of these days, somebody's going to die because of it. The FAA has actually, I read a notice that came out this week. The FAA is looking to change some of the airway structure here in the state, and the FAA Western Service Center down in Seattle, so there's nobody here in Alaska that said this, said that industry has asked to move away from ground-based legacy nav aids and is supportive of going all GPS. And I'm like, okay, that's out of context, and that's not the whole story. But here's the problem, legacy nav aids are expensive.
So is crash.
So is crashing. Yeah. I'm gonna date myself a little bit, but there's people in the room that are older than I am, because I can look, because I can see it. How many folks were really good at flying the NDB and flying ADF approaches? My favorite approach was using an RMI. RMIs are awesome. You can do a lot of cool stuff with an RMI, okay? The younger folks in the room have no idea what we're talking about. But NDBs are virtually gone in the lower 48. They're essentially gone here in Alaska. In the lower 48, VORs are being drawn down to a minimum operational network, and now there's conversations within the FAA that, you know, we may not even worry about a minimum operational network. We may just start shutting them down. Alaska has never had enough VORs to be considered a minimum operational network by the same standard that the lower 48 is talking about, drawing down. The VORs we have are hard to maintain. They're antiquated. It's difficult to get parts for. How many folks have seen what's on the low altitude chart out of McGrath right now and been there since August? What does a squiggly line mean over the top of an airway?
Not available.
Not available. It's been not available so long that they've actually put it on the chart as not being available. Nobody can tell me when it might possibly become available, because the McGrath VOR is operating at such a low power, you can't pick the thing up more than 20 miles away. How many folks have seen the GPS interference testing NOTAMs, the jamming NOTAMs? How many people have actually paid attention to those NOTAMs? How many people have actually been impacted by actually being jammed? A couple of people, okay? That's going to happen more and more, because again, and I've said this lots of other places, I fully support the military doing that type of training. They have to do that type of training, because we know what happens when we get into a fight. All you have to do is look at Ukraine. All you got to do is look over at Israel and Gaza. What happens when things start kicking off? GPS gets jammed. So our military needs to train to not have GPS. What happens though, we get so dependent on GPS, and because of just the way life normally flows, we've allowed ourselves to become so dependent on GPS, and all the backup systems are going away, so we have no backup. What do? There was a comment earlier about using a chart. Okay. How many people have actually legit, be honest, flown with just this chart within the past 6 months because you just wanted to practice? There's a couple of people. Okay. You need to do that more often. You got to keep those skills sharp, because you're going to find yourself in marginal conditions one day. You're going to be a part of the state that's going to be actually impacted by one of these events, or there's going to be a solar flare, which I know I'm sounding like some crazy dude from the bush, but we've had a lot of solar activity lately, and it's been awesome to see the northern lights. But you know what that does for satellites, right? You know what that does to the WAAS capabilities. Okay? It degrades the GPS signal. So, if you are so dependent on GPS, and I think if I was to ask this question and people were honest, they would raise their hands, we have all put ourselves in positions where we were in marginal conditions, too low. Only thing keeping us alive was that portable handheld GPS that was telling us where the terrain was. Stop it. Stop it. Because when you need it the most, it's gonna shut off. Okay, that's just the way life is, and that's what Murphy says. Yes, sir.
I want to back up real quick, as you mentioned, there's no deaths to the GPS. I'd like to mention two boys in Kodiak got stuffed in because they're playing young kids being screen junkies, and they didn't have any of the old pilots to teach them how to properly run a landline or know your situation. And they drove into that mountain as clean as anything, and they were
Yep.
locked and loaded the whole way in.
All the way down.
And they were only mile off course.
Yep.
So it's real, you know, people have
It's
died
absolutely
because they were looking at the box and not.
Do
paying
not
attention.
put your life in the hands of that terrain database. It's a lot better than it used to be, but I can't tell you how many times I'm flying along and all of a sudden this thing's blurring at me and there's nothing there. And other times I'm flying along like, how come this is not warning me about this hill over here? Right? So be careful what you do. Okay, so how many people know that I do a YouTube update for the Airmen's Association once a month? Okay, good. This is a link to the playlist. You can go back and watch all those videos. Tuesday night, I'm going to do another one. You'll see some of the same content that you heard today on there, but I do every month. What's the big stuff that's going on?
Don't go live anymore, though, do you?
I do not do them live anymore. I actually enjoyed doing them live because I got the interaction with a lot of you, where you'd ask a question, I can answer it directly. I've been accused of being a gadget guy, but running 3 separate cell phones and looking at questions on all 3 of them and talking live all at the same time with no help got a little too much. So, and they wanted it on YouTube, and I was like, okay, then we're just going to do it on YouTube. So, okay.
Adam, any more talk about the golf airspace stuff that was coming up about getting rid of, they were talking about that. Anything else about?
They have pulled back their proposal a little bit.
Okay.
On that. We can talk all about it.
Okay.
So, real quick, I know I'm running really late here, but if anybody have any questions on anything we may not have covered?
Yeah.
Yes, Marshall.
Hey, my name's Marshall from Safety Foundation. Just want to say thank you very much for, talking straight to us. The other thing I just mentioned too about the ADSB and the Class C is that we became very aware that training is going to be essential for this transition to the new Class C airspace.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people have gone under assumptions in the past. They've been taught by, it may be 3, 4, 5, or 6 times removed from the actual, rulemaker, let's say. So it gets changed in transmission. So deviation does not mean deviation from Part 93. And now Part 93 does not mean a deviation from operating Class C airspace, for example. So that's why you hear it on the ATIS now every time you tune in the ATIS.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one little quick one. For the dinosaurs out there, I'd like to really thank the Christians in the state for having AM radios. I think you'll just go about to every village out there and you're going to find an AM broadcast from a Christian station. It gets old listening to when you've got a couple hours to kill, but
Maybe you need to change
but
your
it'll get you there. And that Christian station is going to get you somewhere on an ADF, just as well as anything else. With that said, you are now stepping off res. Have a map, know where it is, build your approach, pay attention, be a pilot. But we do still have tools, because if, like he said, a satellite goes down because of the solar flare, it could be the dinosaur on the Christian station being the Christian to keep all of us around.
I will say this publicly, I've flown from Bethel all the way to Nenana listening to KJMP out of Norfolk.
Working hours for
Yes, sir.
And the other thing about all the eggs in the basket, it's not just all the jamming and the solar effects, but if you have a complete electrical failure in an airplane,
Yep.
and you don't have a backup like a battery iPad, you're in the same boat.
Yep. So my boss would not allow me to speak in public if I didn't mention the raffle. So that's where you can go buy your tickets. And then there's my contact info, so, anyway,